Great. Well, hi, everybody. I'm here at the McDonald Garden Market. So if you're local, you probably know McDonald Garden Center. For 7 years, I was their VP of marketing and didn't realize I loved plants until I worked there, and just kind of fell in love with gardening and container plants and sort of using plants to decorate. And so Valina was talking about, we'd really like to have a container class. And I was like, kind of hesitant, but I'm like, okay, well, I'll do it. I don't know if I know everything, but we'll go through it a little bit. But anyway, when I was at McDonald's, they kind of saw this huge trend of people, stopping gardening, stopped purchasing plants. Like it was just kind of like this dying hobby. And that's when they sort of came up with this concept of these garden markets where you pop plants that are like easy color, not crazy expensive, where people can just kind of dabble. And as we've sort of gone through, since that time in the early 2000s to now, COVID happened and people are really into gardening. And, you can see, house plants are trending, macrame's back. There's plants kind of everywhere. If you go to Fresh Market, they've got baskets and containers. So it is really kind of fun that container gardening's back, and who thought that gardening would be hip. So Joel, if you'll put the first slide up, I thought I'd kind of take a second because people may or may not know this, but the USDA does a plant hardiness map, and you can go to the next slide. That's just the front slide, and it kind of shows the whole state, and it's done in 2012. It was revised to kind of these 10-degree temperature differences, and so it's pretty particular. But the important note about this is that we kind of fall between zone B and zone 7B and zone 8A. And the big important piece is that our last frost date is typically around April 15th. And everyone, of course, wants to garden on the very first day that it's warm outside in March. And that's not when you're going to find your plant selection. So if you keep that in mind, April 15th is kind of your planting date. That's when you'll start to see more annuals, more color, and all of that at a garden center. So it's just and some plant tags will also will tell you more information. And really the difference between 7B and 8A is the last frost date. And that's somewhere around the beginning of November. And it can be anytime in November. I mean, you know the weather around here. So why container gardening? I think that's the next slide. Last year, people spent $1.3 billion on container gardening. That's a lot of money. So, I just looked at kind of the common reasons of why people do it. Less weeds, it makes your house look good. Decoration, perfect for small spaces, less time consuming, movable, you name it, people do it. And I'm sure this is why all of you are interested in doing it now. So you will know all of this, but I'm going to go into a little bit of detail. The basics of all plants: sun, water, and soil, right? And all of those things make such an important combination for a plant. Sunlight, it's the most essential element for all plants, and they need it to live. And we'll talk about sunlight, and we're going to talk about the definition of the terms and how you know the type of sun in your garden. But whether you're shopping for annuals, perennials, all of the light levels are defined in the same exact way. So Joel, go to the next slide. So full sun, part sun, shade, and part shade. Typically no one ever really gets what this is, or if you're reading the tag, you do get confused. Full sun is 6 or more hours of direct sun per day. That means the hottest part of the day, the hottest, brightest sun will be on your plants. And those plants typically can survive with less water and are more heat tolerant. So when you're looking at the tag, and I have a tag in my hand, it'll say full to part sun. And typically they're kind of like hedging their bets, because if you put, this is a super Bina, this probably would be fine. But a lot of times when they say that, they're going to do best in part sun, because that's when you'll get the most blooms and they won't scorch. So part sun, there's a plane flying by. Part sun's 4 to 6 hours of direct sun per day, but it doesn't all have to be at the same time. And the big thing to remember with part sun is that it's going to bloom best with part sun. So that's what they're saying on the tag. It's going to perform best with part sun, so you'll have the most blooms. And I would say like 80% of the plants out there will say part sun because that's what every plant needs. Shade is less than 4 hours of direct sun per day. And typically you would say that as kind of like doppled, and shade really kind of goes with part shade because if you were in a deep, dense forest, there's not a lot that grows. So it isn't so much that it's not going to receive any sun, it's just going to receive less sun. And then part shade is can receive more sun, but it shouldn't receive that hot afternoon sun. So in the morning it will do best and it will bloom. Go to the next slide, and I kind of put some pictures in. They decided to do an air show, like right now. So you can see the difference in the photo of the full sun and just how bright it is. And, you know, the plants that are doing great, and then full shade, which still has a little bit of sun in that photo. All right, the next one. So watering, I brought in, my dad is the manager of the market at McDonald Garden Center. And so he's going to talk about water because watering is probably the most important part. And people don't even think about it with a plant. It's always typically an afterthought of, oh, I just have to go water my plant. But if you really want good blooms and you want a container garden to thrive, you've got to water. And so this is my dad, John.
Hi, how you doing tonight? Just like us, plants need water, and every plant requires it. Along with the correct amount of sunlight, the proper soil mixture, the most important of these is the water. Signs for watering: withered leaves, new growth tips drying up, a pot that's really light to the touch and pick up. It's an easy way here in the market. We kind of push up on the pots to see whether they're heavy or light. Discolored leaves. If a plant has multiple colors and you're seeing them turn more brown or different shades of dark green, it needs water. Dry soil to the touch. And we're lucky to have some native plains flying right here. Letting soil will turn real light in color. The sound of freedom. Maybe that's enough for right now. When it turns really light colored, well-watered potting soil will be dark. It'll turn a light tan. Touching it to your fingers, it's going to feel dry. Another big sign is in a pot, if the soil is pulling away from the edge of the pot when you look into it, it definitely needs soil. Potting soil is like a sponge. It has to absorb the water and expand to hold it for a time. So when you start to water, usually as soon as you pour it in, if it's really dry, you'll see the water run out the bottom of the pot. Don't stop there because it's not wet enough. It takes a while for that sponge to absorb the water up to hold it for a couple of days. So don't get confused when you see it run through the bottom. A lot of people think it's already wet. It isn't. When you're watering, if you have a wand, kind of like this one, or if you're using a spray nozzle on the hose, plants don't like to have water sprayed on top of them. They need to be watered from the underneath near the root system. So they don't absorb the water through the leaves. So I don't know if you can see here, but if you reach up under the pot like that and just put the nozzle in on a very slow, gentle flow, not real high. If you water from the top and on cool nights, it can get to where you get a lot of fungus because it doesn't have time to dry up. Right? Weather is a big contributor to watering. Active plants need water for active growing. plants with thin leaves, something like this one, for example, will lose water faster than thick leaf plants. When plants are budding out and blooming, they require more water because they're using more moisture for that process. Small pots, little small pots like these, we call 4-inch pots, they dry out really quick. Clay pots, and we have a big clay pot, but anyway, the standard little clay pots that you use in the garden, they absorb water into the clay. So those will dry quicker than, say, ceramic pots or glazed pots. And plants with a healthy, massive root system will absorb more water. I guess they're all born out tonight. So anyway, that's just a little quick overview on water.
So when you work at McDonald's and they hire you, that's your first lesson is watering, and you have to take a test on it. So obviously there's a lot of investment in plants, and so they want you to know exactly how to water them and take care of them. The last thing that we're going to talk about is soil, and good potting soil. This picture shows it perfectly. It retains moisture, but it provides enough space for the roots to breathe, and then it allows for your plants to anchor and be supported. So when you're looking at potting soil, when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any kind of garden center, they always have potting soil, organic potting soil, all-purpose potting soil, or topsoil. And the difference is, and this will kind of give you just a quick sort of rundown of organic is all of dirt is organically based, but it's going to be free from chemicals, and it will have a different pH level because it is organic, and it has all kinds of random worm casings, that type of stuff to make it organic. The non-organic soil is cheaper, but it uses, to create the space, it uses products like styrofoam, and it will have a neutral pH because it's synthetic and it's man-made, so there's a lot more control. But topsoil, which some people confuse, and I've even done this before if you're buying really quick, topsoil is for planting in the ground. It is not for putting in a container, because most of the time it's made with clay, so it's really, really, really thick, and the water can't get through, and so the soil will either stay wet or it'll be too heavy for you to kind of dig in and let the roots really expand. So the next piece that people always ask is about fertilizer. Should you do it? Should you not do it? So unlike plants in the ground, and I included this slide, plants in the ground get nutrients from, all kinds of things. If you fertilize your grass, they've just got natural nutrients. But plants in a container don't get anything like that. It's just what you put in the pot. So I recommend, and I think, most would recommend, that you should fertilize, especially if you're watering appropriately, because the water will, as it flows through the bottom of the pot, it'll leach out. Too little fertilizer is always the best option because you will burn the roots of the plant and the plant will just fall over. You typically start to feed the plant about 3 weeks after you've planted the container. And so if you can see, there are always little, green balls and that kind of stuff in your, I don't know if you can see it up close, in your pots when you're buying it. That's fertilizer. So that will help you for those first few weeks as you get started. And then if the container leaves on the plant look droopy or wilted or anything along those lines, don't fertilize it. That's everybody's first option. Water it first, let it really soak up the moisture. Make sure that you're not just watering so the water runs through, that you're really getting it fully wet, because if it's not really wet, then that fertilizer can scorch the roots of the plant, and then your plant will die. So the 3 types of fertilizer that you see is water soluble, and that means it can just be mixed with water, and you can use, just a watering can and put it right in the soil. It's quickly absorbed, and typically that's every 2 to 3 weeks. There's granule, which is where you just sprinkle a small amount. That can be more dangerous because if you sprinkle too much, it really can scorch the roots, and it also flushes out quickly because you're just sitting it on top. My favorite, and Joel, if you'll take the slide down, is sort of an all-purpose plant food, and it's slow release. And this is just the McDonald's version, but any slow release fertilizer is great. So when you dig the hole to put your plants in the container, you just sprinkle a little bit in there and then put the plant in, and it's fertilizing over time. So you don't have to remember to do it. The one thing is, do you want to talk a little bit about the numbers? So when you are fertilizing, the numbers on the container, on the packaging, make a difference. And so the blooming and rooting is what most garden centers will sell, to help your plants bloom. And the reason is the 958.8, and the 9 is the nitrogen level. And then the middle number is going to be your phosphate. And then the last is the potash. And so in the spring, you want the first number to be high. And 9 is about as high as you can get, because that's what's gonna shoot up the blooms. And so something like this is a water soluble. You could just mix it with your watering can and put it right in with your plants. Any questions on that side of it, Joel?
We don't have any at the moment.
All right.
I'm sure we'll come up with some as we go forward.
Well, that's kind of the nuts and bolts. All right, so now it's the more kind of like fun stuff. So there's really no wrong way to create containers. I sort of think you just pick your pot, you pick your plants, and then you put it in the soil. So when you're picking pots, did we lose the screen? There it is. When you're picking pots, you want to make sure you pick pots that have really good drainage holes. A lot of the decorative pots that you'll see in places, and the urns and that kind of stuff, do not have drainage holes. So you definitely want to make sure that the water can run through. Otherwise, it'll sit in the bottom and you'll get root rot. But you also can choose tall pots. You can choose pots that accent your front door. You can put a bunch of like pots together. It's easier to grow plants in larger pots just because it keeps water longer, so you don't have to water it as often. But some of the textures, and we talked about this at McDonald a lot, but clay or terracotta are typically your cheapest, and a lot of people like those, but they break. And if you leave them out over winter, because they do absorb water, they can freeze. And so that's why a lot of times, often when you go to replant in the spring, it's broken off one side of it because it's held the water and it's frozen. Concrete is a lot heavier. It lasts a long time. You can see that in that picture, but it isn't feasible sometimes to move it. And then plastic and fiberglass are what a lot of people use now, and that's just lightweight, it's inexpensive, and there's a million trillion options. So when you go to pick your plant, you're going to pick your plants based on your sunlight, like we talked about earlier, and you just want to make sure that you're picking plants that are similar. So you don't want to choose a plant that wants full shade and mix it with a plant that has that wants full sun, because then one of them won't be very happy. You can pick plants when you're assembling them in a, for a container that's based on the leaf color. It could be monochromatic, it could be complementary colors, it can be any of the colors on the color wheel that go together. And the one thing I threw in is the rule of threes. Everyone hears about the rule of threes, but basically things that are in odd numbers are more appealing, memorable, and effective. And so a lot of times you'll see containers that are in 3s, 5s. Typically you don't see more than that because because it's round, or square, you'd want some symmetry. At this point, when you're picking your plants, I was going to talk about a plant tag. So if you go to the next slide, most people, oh wait, we missed it. Go to the next one, Joel, maybe. There we go. If you're looking at the plant tag, it's going to always say, no matter what it looks like, the sun exposure, the water needs, the size the plant will get, and the spacing. And that's kind of the most important. They will also put a whole bunch of other random stuff on it. But that's really the most important are those things. And the sun is normally always on the front. You know, full to part sun. And remember, full sun is 6 to 8 hours, part sun 4 to 6, but it doesn't have to be all at the same time. Watering needs, if it's normal, if it likes to be dry, and then size and spacing, so how big the plant will get. And then it will talk about any planting tips, where you could use it sometimes, or you know, anything that like they might find interesting. But the plant tag always tells you sort of what you need. And one of the things that's interesting on the plant tag is the spacing. A lot of times if you follow the spacing, it doesn't always align with the size of the plant. And so I always like to go a little bit smaller than what they say for the size of the spacing of a plant, because especially in a container, if you do it as far apart as they say, it'll look kind of sparse. And then the last, which you'll have to go backwards one, Joel, is the planting. It's the soil. So using good soil is key. And one of the things that people always kind of forget about is you fill the pot about halfway through, maybe a little more full, and then you put your hole to put your plant in. You need to tease the roots slightly apart, and this picture kind of did it so that you know, they're not so compact. It's not like you just dump it straight from the pot that it's in into the ground. And then you never want to put so much soil on top that it's like strangling the plant. And this is especially important if you're using trees or perennials or shrub plants in containers, because they don't like to be covered more than what's already in the pot. So, you know, just apply a light soil over the roots. It doesn't need to be built all the way up around the tops of the plant. The only plant that works really great for are tomato plants. And so tomato plants will form roots out of wherever it hits the dirt is where it will start to put in a root. So it's kind of interesting, however high you build the dirt around it, the tomato plant will kind of grow its roots from there. So the recipe that I've always used in making containers, and I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's really easy and it helps you remember. It's a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. And Joel, if you'll go back to the screen, I have some examples. So a thriller is something kind of tall or something showy that might be in the middle of a container. This is a spike, but then you could also use a tomato plant, or you could use, behind me I've got, this is, well, that doesn't have a thriller in it, but this is a mosquito plant. So anything that's kind of structural and tall that you can build around can be the middle. The spiller could be anything. This is Lismachia, and you can tell immediately, it just drapes over the plant and it'll, you know, fill out and grow towards the ground. But you also could use something like curled parsley. You don't have to use conventional plants. You can look around and choose sort of anything you want. And then a good filler is something that might be tall or contrasting in bloom. This is euphorbia, but you can tell it's kind of more bushy. So it'll just kind of fill in around all of these other things. Sometimes people use begonias, or you'll see vinca or petunias. Those are all things that, you know, are pretty common in containers. A few design tips that I've just kind of put together along the way when creating containers. I think I have pictures for all of these. Is monochromatic always works well if you aren't sure what to do. So use a contrasting pot with a monochromatic plant selection, and you can't go wrong. So this is a palm with the sweet potato vine kind of in the same color, and then that lime green million bells. And again, that follows the same pattern of a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. And that's actually at the McDonald location at Independence, but it's really nice in sort of that rust colored pot. It adds sort of an interesting look. The next one shows texture and color. So, you know, be looking for interesting textures. It could be ruffled leaves like coleus. It could be grass. It could be, that's a native plant, the yarrow in the back, or Dusty Miller has like a velvety leaf. So this one also uses singular color and just yellow, but it does have really interesting textures. So that's kind of a fun place to start if you don't exactly know what to put together. The next one is height. So you can do tall or you could make it all mounded depending on where you were going to put it. This one uses a Japanese maple as the thriller. So then that would stay in the pot. And from there, you could replace the others. And so the Japanese maple is paired with coreopsis and petunias and then sort of an ornamental grass. And as fall comes along, you could pull out the coreopsis and the petunias and put in pansies, and you can make it kind of bridge all of the seasons. But that, as if you're choosing a tree, obviously you have to choose a pretty big pot. This one is using rich colors. People don't always think about, you know, in springtime, you think about using pinks and purples and lilac colors, but sometimes these really dark colors can make a total statement. I know there's black petunias, there's super dark purple. These are petunias and million bells mixed together in that wine color. And then a cordyline, which also could last throughout the season. So you could do both. And then just uses the euphorbia, like I was showing earlier, as a good filler. And it will grow. So now I've just put together sort of some recipes, and we can kind of walk through a few that I think might work. And some of these pictures are ones that I found off of the internet, but I can kind of show you around here. But when you're doing a full sun container, this is probably one of my favorite containers. This one would be great for any full sun. And a lot of times you'll see these flowers at busch gardens and theme parks because they are pretty hardy. But hibiscus is a tropical plant. So around here, it will only live through the summertime. You could try to bring it inside, but they are a little fussy. With lantana, which attracts butterflies. So that's and bees. So that's a good filler. And then the spiller is the sweet potato vine. And so all of those are super tropical. The colors kind of coordinate together, and it's for sure a full sun. It can sit by a pool deck. Well, I have a hibiscus here I can show you that's super bright. You can find them, sorry, Joel, that you have to go back and forth, but in all different sizes. And then the flower is really, really pretty. It will attract bees and butterflies. It doesn't have a ton of nectar, but it's a pretty good size shrub, you can tell. So, you know, you'd have to have a pretty big pot for that one. The next one is also a full sun container. And this one is using a mandevilla, which will climb. So you can grow this just, you know, if you had a pot and you wanted to put it on a trellis, or if you wanted to put it on a fence post or next to a deck, it'll kind of trail up and you can train it. In more tropical areas, you'll see it and it'll live year round. But here it's full sun. Again, like the hibiscus, it will only last through the end of the summer, but it can be paired with million bells, petunias, and it comes in a million colors. Joel, if you can flip back, sorry. You can see it. I don't know if the sun's blocking it, if I'm too close, but it comes kind of on a trellis and it'll just keep climbing. And then you just simply take it and you can use twine or anything and put it straight on your fence or up a pole. And a lot of people use it on boat docks because you can keep it in a pot and then grow it up and grow something below it. Ooh. So the next we'll flip to shade. And there's not as many shade options out there, but most of the time with shade plants, you'll see a lot of the really pretty containers are white, just because the space is dark and shaded. The whites or soft yellows kind of complement that. And so this has an elephant ear that's kind of growing up, which is a perennial, so it can come back. It's got impatiens and asparagus fern. And there's all kinds of different options for the that you could use also with like a variegated coleus. Some plants will, unless they're just a full sun plant, they will kind of survive in part shade. They just might not as bloom as often. All right. This is like one of my favorites. It's an insect repelling container garden, and people don't even think about this, but there's this really cool plant. It's a citronella geranium, and it was bred a few years ago, and it doesn't produce any blooms, but the leaves look just like a regular geranium, and you can see it right there in the front, but it smells just like citronella. And if you rub your hands on it, you can rub them on your arms, you can rub them on your legs, and it just has such a great fragrance, and it's got a very cool texture. But you can pair it with marigolds, which also have sort of an odor, so they will keep plants away. And then you could do something like rosemary, you could do lemongrass, anything that might be a little bit taller to maybe add something interesting if you wanted to do that. The next slide is also another insect repelling container garden, kind of in the same vein, but you can see lemongrass is a little tall and straggly. And then this one also has mint. Anything that has an odor typically helps with bugs. And both of those are sun to part sun type containers. I added in a few of the interesting, sometimes people don't think about it, like a pizza container or an Italian container, where you would use a tomato in the middle. So not a giant beefy tomato, but you could use, a little sun gold or some kind of small tomato, and then put with it oregano, parsley, basil. You could even put red million bells. You could have a lot of fun with it. I think one of the things that people don't realize sometimes, or when they're asking questions, they think, oh, I can't mix all of these things together. But you can totally mix it. You could put a tomato plant in the middle, you could add million bells below it and put curly parsley in it. But you could do all kinds of combinations and mix it. And so I have herbs and flowers in almost all of my pots. I have begonias, and then I have basil, and I just kind of mix them all up as long as they have the same amount of sun, and it kind of looks pretty. It's then functional and works well. And then the last container that I kind of included is a water-wise container. And it doesn't look as pretty in this photo as it does in real life, but using hens and chicks, which are, just little succulents, which are kind of really popular right now, sedums, euphorbia is a really good plant that doesn't have, that's pretty water-wise and won't require a lot of water. But you could use, any kind of just thick leaf, a snake plant, that kind of stuff would be sort of a water-wise container if you think that you would struggle to take care of it. But again, those are going to require full sun kind of all the time. So those are sort of the ones that I put together, for us here. If you go back to the screen, I have a few that don't have, here, I'll move this down, that didn't have a thriller and a spiller, but are really pretty. And this one is a begonia. So it's, most people think begonias are kind of boring and plain, but this begonia has a double bloom on it. And so it's really pretty when you add like it's a Selenia begonia, so it'll tolerate the sun, and the euphorbia. And then on the back, it's a totally funky color of euchera that's dark purple. And so it kind of just anchors it, but sort of anything goes. And then this is a more traditional container with the yellows, the whites, and the purples, but it's low. There is no thriller in it, and it's still, quite pretty. I think it's just been watered. So those are kind of the recipes that I had put together. I guess, do we have any questions? I didn't want to just keep being, boring and show recipes the whole evening, but
we do. We have several questions.
Okay.
So excellent way to get us started, Rebecca. And so I've got a number of questions kind of touching on some things that you've mentioned, and then some recommendation requests. The first thing I want to ask, and also before I do that, if anyone has questions, please share them with us. We've got plenty of time. I think we'd be able to get to them all. But the first question I have, so talking about soil and fertilizer in particular, and herbs, tomatoes, vegetables, things that you're going to eat. Are there any things to watch out, anything I need to watch out for, specific fertilizer I should use, things I should stay away from, or is it all kind of the same? Potting soil, fertilizer doesn't matter for plants that you're eating, and then for decoration?
So, yes, that is a great question. So for plants that you're eating, I would recommend putting, like, if you used organic topsoil, if you know you're going to eat them. I mean, an organic potting soil, and you also could throw in a little compost that you can get at any garden center, which is sort of a natural way to fertilize the soil. I would not recommend super chemically things like Miracle-Gro or something that's going to do things weird like that. The McDonald one that I use, the slow release, is fine. They have an organic version, and then they also have this version. And I use this on all of my edibles as well. But I wouldn't use something like the blooming and the rooting that's more like chemically enhanced to just really like make blooms happen. So yeah, I mean, that's a great question. If you wanted to go all natural, you could just use an organic soil with compost mixed together. There is one that, do you remember the name of it? It's something with a frog. It's got a frog on the bag. I could look it up, but that's the best edible fertilizer that's out there. But it comes in a small bag and it's pretty expensive.
Yeah. Like
tree
most
frog.
organic
It's
things.
called tree frog.
Tree frog. Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So on that note, talking about tomatoes, herbs, and even flowers, and talking about sunlight, a very specific question here. So an apartment balcony that has sunlight only in the afternoon, what is your recommendation for tomatoes, herbs, and flowers?
So that would be, so if it's in the afternoon, I would say that that's full sun. And on a balcony, I would say from the tomato standpoint, where are the small ones? The Sweet and Neat is my very favorite tomato. It grows pretty compact, but it's a prolific producer. And this is what it looks like. And they have it at Lowe's, Home Depot. They have it at all of the places. But this will produce all year round. Or the yellow, the yellow gold, sun gold 100s or something like that. And that produces the yellow tomatoes. But I would stay with something like that. As far as flowers go, you could kind of do almost anything. If you were looking for a theme, something on a balcony, it might be like really vibrant colors, like maybe in the pinks so that other people could see it, or reds. So that would be something, you could do on a balcony. And then for herbs, you can kind of do anything. The one herb that I haven't had a lot of success with in this area, and I don't think very many people do, is lavender. Because the soil around here, we get too much rain. It kind of needs a drier, rockier soil to really grow well. But herbs, you can do basil in a pot. You can add a bunch of different ones in a pot. I love the Sweet and Neat tomato with basil, and that will just grow and grow and grow. But you could do a window box with something coming like a sweet potato vine and just a bright color in it. And you also can do edibles in window boxes and herbs.
Awesome. Thank you for that. The next one is going back to insect repelling containers. And do you have any recommendations for insect repelling containers for shade?
Ooh, insect. The geranium will grow in the shade for sure. The marigolds will not. The rosemary will take shade. Mint would take shade. Those are all, I even have had luck with oregano in the shade, and that's a spiller, like it will spill out. And that has a strong odor that you can rub. But I did rosemary in my garden beds last year in the shade with all white plants, and it was great. And you can just rub it, you know, like rub the stalk, and it produces that aroma. But you could definitely use the citronella geranium in that in shade, as long as it's not like dense shade underneath a canopy of trees.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, so the next question, and I think you mentioned, so I think rosemary might be one of these things, but this person asks, what kinds of plants would you recommend for black thumbs who aren't good at caring for plants, sporadic with watering and fertilizing, plants that can kind of survive on their own until you get back to them? And I think rosemary is one of those because it likes to dry out, but are there others?
Yes, artificial plants. No, I'm just kidding. So snake plants are great for that. I just saw one over there, and that also can be a house plant. But anything like begonias or impatiens, you know, geraniums, if they're in full sun, will require a lot of water. But anything like, I mean, begonias are probably one of the easiest plants to use. And if you wanted the succulent look, you could easily go with hens and chicks, or here is this is like a whole bunch. This is just a mixture of hens and chicks, but it's all the succulents, and they have super thick leaves, so you don't have to have a lot of watering, but they're not as showy and beautiful. But this container, it would be super easy. It's begonias, there's a green spike, and euphorbia. And as long as you water it every now and again, it would be okay. And begonias come in a million colors, and the bronze leaf begonia will take more sun. So if you are somewhere that has a ton of sun and not, you know, part sun, you could use the bronze leaf begonia with maybe a red spike and kind of capture the same look.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay. Next question. It's a three-parter, a multi-parter. What are the three sisters with vegetable planting? This person thinks beans is one. And also, how do you divide daylilies?
So daylilies are perennial. And when you divide them, it's after they bloom. So it's in the fall time. Those plants, like once, you know, hydrangea and some of those plants, you don't want to do anything to those typically right before they bloom. So if you're going to cut them back, do it after they've bloomed, but some things will bloom on old wood. So if you're going to divide daylilies, you would wait for them to finish blooming kind of in the August time. And then in fall, you can use a shovel to separate them out and put them in the hole. I would fertilize it so that they could, so they would have a little fertilizer. But fall is the best time for any dividing and pruning. And also if you're going to plant any type of trees or shrubbery, just because it's so hard to keep up with the water, not because of any other reason, but it's harder to keep up with water in the summer with trees and shrubs. And then the three sisters, is it beans, corn, and I don't know either. I'll have to look that up. I don't remember. I have heard that. Yeah.
On that note, though, while we're talking about vegetables, are there other vegetables besides tomatoes that do particularly well in containers?
Yes, peppers. So the one that I was holding up earlier is a pepper plant. You can see the itty bitty pepper kind of growing on it. Squash will do well. I have seen eggplant grown in a plot because it does have like this purpley kind of flower on it. If you can see it, I like to spread out a little bit. Tomatoes are probably the best, but peppers are really good. That's probably about it, because most other things are going to go in vines. You could do a bean plant if you, you know, stalked it up something. So you could do it sort of like a man.
Awesome. Okay, next question. Can you talk a little bit? So I'm going to take this question and kind of expand it out a little bit. It's talking about making your own compost. And so the question specifically is about bugs in the compost from the vegetable and yard clippings. But are there any other guidelines you can think of using your own homemade compost in pots? Is there any special treatment you need to do, or any issues with bugs, worms, things like that?
Can you repeat the question? You kind of went
Yeah, sorry. I think we're having a little bit of in and out
there.
So using your own compost that you've made yourself with lawn clippings and plant clippings, are there any concerns or any special treatment you need to do to use that in a pot? And if there's bugs or worms or things like that, are there any tips for using that in containers?
Acidic, and it can have a lot of nitrogen, and so it can burn the plant.
Okay, we lost you for a second, but
Are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, there we go. I think we got you back. It might be. Hopefully, it's not another air show flying over. Awesome. So I'll move on. We've got a few more questions. There's actually a question for me. Somebody direct messaged me asking if I would share pictures of my containers. I don't have any pictures, but my pots are Lowe's 5-gallon buckets with herbs in them. Nothing,
Yes.
nothing too fancy. Rebecca's definitely got the design edge on me. And then compliments to your dad as well, and his expertise. And so here's a question. How do I keep my sweet potato vines from getting all pocked up as the summer progresses?
The insects. What was it that they got? The
Sweet potato vines. Yeah, they get pocked up as the summer progresses.
Typically that's slugs. And so there is a powder that you can put that would prevent it. If you're doing something edible, you would not want to put it on there, but you can put it on the leaves, and it once you start to water, it'll kind of go away. But that's typically what is attracted to sweet potato vines, caterpillars and slugs.
Would netting help with that as well?
Would you like to look at netting?
I know it's not the most, I know we're going for the design aesthetic, but
You're right there.
You supposedly for slugs you can use beer.
I've heard that as well, and they drown in it, right?
Yeah.
What a way to go.
What a way to go. Down with the ship.
That's right. Okay, moving on. Do hostas go well with any other plants in a container?
Oh yeah, hostas are awesome because you can do the variegated leaves. Go with anything white, so white begonias, you could do white impatiens. Hostas typically like the shade to part shade, so you're going to want to look for plants that will thrive in that type of lime green. The sky's the limit with hostas, and plus the great part about a hosta is that you can divide it at the end of the season, and so you can get a few and then just keep using them throughout your garden. You could try your hand with lavender with the hostas, or purple heart. I've seen both of those go nicely, like with the variegated, that purple color.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, next question. Really broad one, but can you say something about the varieties of mint?
Yes, there's lots of mint. There's peppermint, there's spearmint, there's chocolate mint, which is kind of strange. And then there is an apple mint, and then mojito mint, which is and then Kentucky mint. And the one thing I will say about mint is that it is listed as an invasive plant, like bamboo in this area, because it will just grow and grow and grow and take over your garden. We always recommend planting it in a pot, because if it's in a pot, you can contain it, but you can easily pull it out and put the roots in a paper towel and replant it in your yard. I mean, it will just grow. I think the probably best mint is either the Kentucky mint or the mojito mint. Both of those are have big leaves. They're easy to use. There's a mojito mint planter. I don't know if you can see it. It's like right behind me. And the leaves are just really green, and it'll just keep growing. And this is kind of a cool container, but you can just use it. And You can use it for drinks, tea. You can just rub it. I mean, you can eat the leaves, but that's probably my favorite mint, just because, I mean, you can see how easily it grows. I mean, the other varieties are kind of strange and just a little interesting. The chocolate mint is a little darker if you were looking for that color, but that or the Colonel Kentucky mint is the best.
Awesome. Yeah, I can testify to mint growing. I planted it along the edge of my yard, and now when I mow my lawn, it smells like an Altoids factory.
Yeah.
It's great. It's good repellent though, right? It repels bugs.
It will repel things.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, we've got a verification on the Three Sisters is beans, corn, and squash.
Yes, I just looked that up too.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, there is one final specific question about plants and containers. What flowers are best in the middle to late summer?
So, Coreopsis, which is black-eyed Susan. That's a really good late summer flower. There's cone flowers, which, you know, most people you've seen those before, but there's a ton of different variety of cone flowers. There's what they call popsicle plant, and it's kind of a long stocky plant that's got little teeny flowers, but that grows great late in the season. And then any of the tropicals, so the mandevilla, the hibiscus, all of those should be, as long as they're watered, will keep thriving all throughout the summer. I'm kind of looking around to see if I'm missing anything big. Oh, verbena's another great one. And then as you get closer to fall, crotons are really awesome. They're a house plant, but they do great around here is kind of in August and in September, October timeline. And then you can bring them in.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Rebecca. And so I'm just scanning through. I want to make sure we did have a lot of questions. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody as we go through. And so thank you for this. I've learned a lot. And all joking aside, I do have, so I decided to do my herbs in pots this year because I got tired of the bugs getting in them and kind of chewing up the leaves. So, but you've inspired me to go a little bit beyond that because right now I just have individual herbs in single pots, but
combine them all together.
That's right. So on that note, I'm going to ask you to kind of close this out, and I wanted you to share a couple things. So there is a question, and I was going to have you kind of build on this a little bit. Recommendations for places to buy plants. I can take a guess at where you're going to send everybody, but good resources, places to buy plants for containers. And then also I'd like you to share your absolute, so your absolute favorite container setup. What's your sort of go-to container if you have one, or your favorite perhaps this year?
So McDonald is great, but I would say any local greenhouse wherever you live, because they're going to have plants that will thrive in your area. And so that's the thing that most people don't realize. You know, Lowe's and Home Depot do a pretty good job, and I think most of their stores are, you know, pretty regionalized, but just like I showed in that beginning map, there is a thin line between all our areas. And so that 10-degree temperature can make a difference. And so if you're really like not sure what you're going to do, a local greenhouse is great. I know there's London Bridge. I mean, there's a million of them around. And a lot of times you can find them at like on Collie when they do that farmer's market, you know, there'll be plants. There won't be as big of a selection, but you know, obviously I have a heart for McDonald because I know all of their plant buyers and I know what they look for, but there's tons of great local greenhouses in this area. And then if I had to pick my favorite container, or what I always go back to, I have a big front porch and it's pretty shady. It doesn't really get a lot of sun. And so my favorite would be some kind of fern, whether it's an asparagus fern, which is the really, really fine fern, or just a Kimberly Queen fern with something white like a euphorbia in it. I mean, this is going to be pretty boring. And then maybe petunias or something else white and blooming. I seem to always gravitate towards white flowers because I think they just show up so nicely, and it's just such a classic touch that can kind of blend with everything. And so that's kind of what I always go to. Even though I love all of the bright colors, I normally always get something white.